In this video, I will be discussing the history of dice and gaming in Greek and Roman society, and try to connect some of those themes with Warhammer and wargaming.
Three each.
So that's all dice, so 3 dice for each one.
That's right.
And the big guy has 4 dice, so all those dice get rolled.
Now I need to hit on 4s. So 4s and higher.
Okay.
4, 5s, and 6s will
4,
hit.
5s, and 6s. Let's see.
Alright. Okay, alright. So a few hits, quite a bit of misses, but thankfully.
You get to re-roll
Let's
them?
see here. Because I'm within 18 inches of an abhorrent, which is this guy,
Okay.
I get to re-roll the attacks.
Okay, that miss. Alright.
Oh, look at that.
Goodness.
All but one are going to hit. That's not good,
Oh,
Yvonne.
man, no, that's not.
That's not good. Alright. Now we're going to go to wound. I need 3 and higher to
Okay.
wound. Oh no!
Okay. We've got to see some wounds there.
Uh-oh. Uh-oh. 2 6s, those are special. They do extra damage. And 5 regular wounds. Now, no rend or anything, and your guys are immune to rend anyway.
Yeah, here.
Alright.
Let's see what happens when I roll.
Alright.
So how many? 5
5 regular.
ones?
Yep.
Alright, and that's my Blade Geist Revenants.
Sure is. You have 4 up.
So 4 and higher, and they don't take any
Damage.
wounds.
Negate my attacks. Oh,
Yes!
what?
All of them!
Really?
All
Every
of them!
single one?
Every single one! Not a wound
Oh, that's
on
not-
me! Yes!
That's not according to the odds at all. Alright.
Yes.
Okay, there are 2 more that are
2
doing
special
extra
ones.
damage. Yep.
Okay, so what do I need on these?
Same deal. Just your regular armor. Hopefully you missed both of these.
Nope.
They both saved?
Both saved.
You made all 7
I did.
armor saves?
All 7 armor
Wow,
saves.
that's terrible. Alright.
Okay, that was part of a longer video I made for my wife's grandson. It kind of demonstrates those strings of good and bad luck that can happen in wargaming. And, you know, those scenes are quite common. We roll dice. We often roll a lot of them. And I find the act, with both its luck and its tribulations, quite enjoyable. So a history of dice and gaming stretches back really thousands of years. And gaming is quite a universal concept to human experience. You can find evidence of throwing dice in biblical passages, in ancient Egypt, Persia, India, China, and even the caves of primordial humans. But as a classicist, I'm going to focus on the history of dice in ancient Greece and Rome. Well, we're not sure when and how dice were invented. It is likely that the talus or knuckle bones of a hoofed animal, that's kind of cool, were first used in religious ceremonies and in attempts at divination, trying to understand the will of the gods. For Romans, for instance, they would often take auspices through an augur. And that would basically involve someone, an official priest, observing the behavior of birds and trying to understand the will of the gods based upon their behavior. The Romans would also sacrifice animals and examine their organs for any hint of abnormality and the associated signs of divine displeasure or favor. And in that type of cultural context, throwing a collection of bones for a similar purpose is not a large leap. Right? We know that the Greeks were using dice for this exact purpose because we have examples of oracle books that reference the throwing of lots alongside sets of accompanying questions and answers. In fact, you know, some of the early dice have words or characters on each face of the dice that represent an ancient god who might assist the dice thrower. So the connection between rolling dice and divine intervention is quite real historically. From the perspective of wargaming, it's not uncommon for wargamers to kind of reference the so-called dice gods when they've been cursed or blessed with an abnormal roll during a game, or switch dice altogether if the rolls seem to indicate a strain or a strain of bad luck. The Romans had several different games involving knuckle bones that were simply called ludere talis, or simply shortened to tali. The verb ludere simply means mimic, mock, or deceive. In its more playful connotations, it simply means play. And talis refers to the bones of the animal. So the term simply means to play with bones. There are two methods of playing with knuckle bones in ancient times. The first, and probably the oldest, consists in tossing up and catching the bones on the back of your hand. Very much as the game is played today. And there are modern derivatives, kind of like jacks and things like that. But there were also several variations and rules even back in ancient Rome. To your left, you can see a painting from Pompeii depicting several different goddesses. And two are shown playing a game of knuckle bones. Now, if they're calling upon the gods themselves, I'm not really sure what divine favor they're going to gain, but I suppose they could. And the earliest dice were simply these knuckle bones, with each side of the bone having a different value. It's essentially a kind of a four-sided dice because they can't actually land on either end, and one side's a little more narrow than the other. And so the convex narrow side of the bone was counted as a value of 1. It was actually nicknamed the dog. And the other sides were valued at 3, 4, and 6. Now, with 4 bones, which is what you'd be tossing, there are about 35 different possible scores. And each of these scores and combination numbers had an associated name, usually after kind of gods or notable people of the ancient world. So to the Greeks, the roles were Aphrodite, Midas, Solon, and Alexander. And in Rome, they were the king and vulture, among others. The best combination throw was called Euripides in Greece, and the throw in Rome was called the Venus throw. In fact, throwing the Venus in Rome could actually mean you were designated to play a specific role in public festivities. I don't know, that could be a little awkward or perhaps a great honor. In both cultures, the lowest role was called the dog. That poor old mutt. I do not know about you, but when I often call upon Sigmar to kind of bless my role when I'm playing my Stormcast Eternals against the brutal forces of chaos. And likewise, sources attest it was common to invoke the name of a god or goddess before the tali were thrown. The six-sided dice that we know and love today were developed in the Far East, and dice games were popular in Greece before spreading to Rome. Most dice were made of bone or ivory, but they had been found in basically every imaginable material, from crystal, jet, marble, porcelain, amber, a lot of different varieties. Now, in general, when you're talking about Roman dice, there are two different sizes. Standard tali were large dice inscribed with 1, 3, 4, and 6 on 4 sides. The name and numbering there is similar to that of knuckle bones, so it seems to me that was kind of a replacement for the traditional bones. There were also smaller catharsis, or cubes, with sides numbered from 1 to 6, with any two opposite sides adding up to 7. These are basically modern dice. Often these early dice were not perfectly cut, so they would have favored some numbers over others. Dice theory probably wasn't, ironically, probably not especially well known at the time, so it's hard to kind of know if that was a purposefully decision or they just associated some dice as being more favorable than others. like today, dice were sometimes shaken in a cup and tossed onto a table. So there were also dice with more sides, including 20-sided dice. Most often each side of the die is inscribed with a number in Greek or Latin and up to the kind of number of faces. And there's evidence to suggest that these types of larger sided dice were also used in gaming. Many dice games involved gambling, and with higher stakes, tempers could flare, and violence was not uncommon. I love doing these types of videos because I usually find something I've never seen before. And this is a painting from Pompeii that tells the story of a game and its outcome. Now, I'm showing a few different panels here on my right, your left, of the original painting, and it's kind of now deteriorated. It was kind of uncovered 100 years ago or more, so the fresco is kind of exposed to the elements. And so below that are two other panels that kind of show the detail of what the original is showing. And in the first panel, two men are sitting opposite one another. The man on the left is shaking a dice cup, and he proclaims "Exi," which means "I'm out," proclaiming that he has won the game. And in response, you can see the other man say, "Non tria, duas est," not three, but two. And basically saying, no, you didn't win, you're miscounting. And in the next picture, you see that they're kind of yelling at each other. And there's some vulgar insults that are kind of passed around here. And there's a third man who's intervening, he's pushing them out. And he is the tavern keeper. And he says to them, "Itas foris rex satis," get out if you want to fight. Gambling with dice seemed to have been enormously popular, but they were sometimes associated with this type of rowdiness, violence, and sometimes even riots, as gamblers incurred heavy losses. So some gamers were also accused of using magic to ensure victory. And although we have ample evidence for Roman curses and such, there are also very strong taboos against the use of magic. And so throughout the Republic and the Empire, this is a period, even if we're talking purely about the Western Empire, it's a period of a good 900 years. Formal gambling was actually illegal, and it was a punishable offense. So today, Christmas is just around the corner. In 40K, this is Sanguinalia, and in Roman times, it was the Saturnalia. And basically, this is a festival to celebrate the Roman god Saturn, and an earlier period of time when the world existed in kind of state of innocence, a time before laws. It was a time when Romans would exchange gifts, switch some of these social norms between slaves and masters, and some laws were relaxed, among them gambling. So during the Christmas season, gambling was permitted. So interestingly, Roman authors kind of back then even complained about how the commercialization of the holiday was kind of constantly growing, and that the festivities seemed to start earlier every single year. And I've certainly heard those complaints about modern Christmas, so I guess things do not change. So there are only a few times a year when gambling was legal. But just like kind of American prohibition of alcohol in the 1930s, you get a real sense that gambling was rampant. Alcohol is legal today, but there's still laws against a public drunkenness and creating a disturbance. And I suspect Roman laws would have operated in a similar manner. Kind of the Roman police, the cohortes urbani, might often look the other way, but you would face consequences if you started a fight or caused a disturbance. At the very least, simply throwing dice without money was quite common. So common, in fact, that there's I was reading about an archaeologist in Rome, and he attests that whenever I've excavated the pavements of a portico, of a basilica, of a bath, or any flat surface accessible to the public, I have found gaming tables engraved or scratched on the marble or stone slabs. So some of these gaming surfaces were also inscribed with more comical phrases. For instance, there's one that says, "You there, get up. You know nothing about the game, so make room for people that are better than you." And this has to be like the Roman equivalent of a "get good," something like that, right? Which is kind of funny to inscribe on your table. But when you read the epigrams of Martial, someone who discusses some of the more common aspects of Roman life, there are references to dice and dice boxes and gaming tables and various games throughout his writings. The common people like to throw dice and play games, but the same could also be said of the most powerful in Roman society. So when you read the biographies of early Roman emperors, there are references to gaming and throwing dice and gambling everywhere. The Roman Emperor Augustus seemingly loved to throw dice. Naturally, there are crazy stories about Nero and Caligula. Claudius wrote a book on the subject of gambling and dice, and he actually designed a carriage that would allow him to play games when he was traveling. Now, later writings about Lucius Verus depict him as transforming his own palace into a gambling den and spending many nights playing games. So undoubtedly, when you're reading these types of stories, some of them are slander, some of them are heavily exaggerated, but there's also likely to be a kernel of truth there too. So most examples I've discussed depict men playing games, but there are many amazing examples of art and statues of women playing knucklebones, playing games, and throwing dice. Some authors would lead you to believe that these types of games were only played by women and children, and old men, for that matter. But Roman society, like ours, had a wide spectrum of opinion, and there are plenty of stigmas and stereotypes surrounding dice and gaming that need to be weighed within the kind of greater cultural context. So some Romans might have looked down on dice and gambling, but clearly many throughout Roman society enjoyed the activity. Naturally, the goddess Fortuna, a personification of fortune, played a large role in gaming culture, but there were also strong ties between the randomness of dice and the chaos of warfare. That's a key part of wargaming in general. Julius Caesar believed that Fortuna was on his side during his military campaigns. I mean, he did everything he could to leverage things possible to his advantage, but he also took advantage when the enemy just had bad luck. And when he decided to march on Rome, he supposedly uttered the phrase, "Alia eacta est," the die has been cast. And I just find that connection between dice rolling and the military to be especially important and really relevant to the discussion here about wargaming. So the playwright Sophocles attributed the invention of knucklebones and dice to Palamedes, who was a mythical figure, a mythical hero of the Trojan War. In both Roman and Greek societies, a lack of historical records meant that ancient heroes and kings take on the role of originators. Okay, so like here I'm thinking on the Roman side, Roman king Numa basically went off into the woods and just created Roman religion because they don't have a historical record to know exactly how it happened. So they basically create a story. So we know that this is historically inaccurate, but Palamedes supposedly invented the following: the alphabet, lighthouses, weights and measures, dice, backgammon, and the discus. And I want you to think about that list for just a moment. These items strike me as the building blocks of commerce and civilization. The Trojan War supposedly lasted 10 years. Most of that time the city was besieged, and there were kind of long periods where soldiers needed to fill their time. So according to the Greeks, dice were invented during that lull in fighting. Palamedes taught the others how to play, and when he returned to Greece, he dedicated his dice in a temple dedicated to the god of fortune. So I have this remarkable image of Achilles and Ajax, and they're sitting down during the Trojan War, during that slow period of the siege, and they're playing a game. And there's a real association that rolling dice and playing games is something soldiers do when they are not fighting. In Rome, the emperor was protected by the elite Praetorian Guard, and excavations have found a tavern sign at the spot where the Praetorian camp once stood. And it basically proclaims, you'll find a good supper inside, the gaming tables are always open. Gaming just seems to be especially common among Roman soldiers. And we found numerous examples of kind of heavy gaming tables that would have been carried from camp to camp as the legionaries marched. We also have an example of a Roman dice tower from the 4th century AD. This is a remarkable little artifact. This is a device designed to produce a reliably randomized outcome with a dice. And the top is open, so you would add the dice into the top, and they would fall through 3 different levels. On the side of this are a series of kind of spikes and projections to get in the way, right? So it's kind of like a game of a Plinko on Price is Right or something. And it would bounce off these little things, and then it would fall out on 3 steps down below. Now, what I find is especially cute is that each of those 3 steps also had a little bell that would ring as the dice bounced down. This type of tower was probably used in a game like Hail Victor, a game that we know and we can actually play now. We know basically have all the rules for this, where the dice would be dropped through the tower, down a tower that specifically has steps, so it seems to make a good fit for me. And then depending on the face of the dice and the various combinations, you would add up points. So this tower was presented as a gift, a pretty luxurious gift, I imagine. And I'll draw your attention to the engraved inscription on the front and around the top of the 3 other faces. And the front of the tower says, Pictos Victos, the Picts defeated. Hostis delenta, the enemy has been destroyed. Ludite securi, play in safety. And around the top of the 3 remaining sides, you can't really see that well, it says, Uteri felix vivisas, which means use and live luckily or happily. There's a real connection there between happiness and luck. And so here too we see this lull in fighting. The Picts, have been defeated, and these soldiers, I'm assuming, but they could be civilians as well, are now happily playing the game. And the connection between periods of fighting followed by periods of gaming made me think about the Greek need for competition and Eris, the goddess of chaos and strife, and her Roman equivalent Discordia. The Greeks would often wage war among themselves, but they could also pivot and compete against one another in sports like the Olympic Games and in the composition of plays, stories, and philosophy even. The 19th century philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche, who I really like, would argue that the transition is an example. The transition between warfare to these other forms of competition is a sublimination of Eris into a different form. And that basically everything that is good in society has this darker undertone. But in some sense, that is the goal of sports and games, right? To direct that drive to compete in a direction that is beneficial and not destructive to society. Certainly that was one of the motivating factors in reviving the Olympic Games in the modern era. So games have a special place in that context. And I think war games have a special place in that context. And honestly, it's not surprising that many war gamers are members of the military or people that just like military history. Wargaming is in some sense a catharsis that pits two people against one another in a test of skill, arbitrated through the randomness of dice and without the need for bloodshed. And perhaps that's a little too heavy, but I'm really struck by the commonness of dice and gaming among soldiers of the ancient world. And it's not too dissimilar from the role of a game like chess in medieval history. But I find the random fortunes of dice to be particularly appealing. It's a particularly unique way of representing warfare, luck, and not having luck, of things happening the way they shouldn't or the way that you expect. And I hope this video has given you some food for thought. It's a fascinating topic to me, and it's really a summary of what is a very in-depth and complex topic. But as always, I do thank you for watching. Please consider supporting the channel by commenting on the video, hitting that like button, and subscribing for more content. Thank you.